The flashing lights of a police cruiser reflected off the crisp white uniform of a decorated Navy vice admiral. As the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists, the smirking patrol officer had no idea he had just committed career suicide and humiliated the wrong man entirely. The air in Norfolk, Virginia, was thick with the early morning coastal mist, carrying the faint, familiar scent of saltwater and diesel from the nearby naval shipyards. Vice Admiral Victor Langston sat behind the wheel of his black, government-leased Chevrolet Tahoe, driving toward Naval Station Norfolk. Langston was a man who commanded respect simply by walking into a room. At 58 years old, he had spent over 3 decades in the United States Navy, rising from a young, ambitious ensign to a 3-star admiral. He had commanded a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, led a carrier strike group in the Pacific, and currently served as the deputy commander of fleet forces. Today, however, was not a standard administrative day. Langston was dressed in his full service dress whites, his chest a heavy, colorful mosaic of ribbons, including the Defense Distinguished Service Medal and the Silver Star. He was en route to a highly classified, time-sensitive briefing with the Secretary of the Navy and a contingent from the Pentagon. 2 miles away from the base's main gate, the blinding glare of red and blue lights shattered the quiet morning. Officer Derek Sloan of the local precinct had been tracking the black Tahoe for 3 blocks. Sloan was a 10-year veteran of the force with a reputation that was whispered about in the locker room but rarely addressed by internal affairs. He was a man fueled by ego, quick to anger, and burdened by deeply ingrained prejudices that had resulted in a string of use-of-force complaints, all conveniently swept under the rug by his sympathetic shift sergeant. Riding shotgun with him was Officer Travis Quinn, a 23-year-old rookie barely 6 months out of the academy, still idealistic and painfully aware of the power dynamics within the patrol car. "Look at this guy," Sloan muttered, his eyes narrowed at the Tahoe ahead. "Blacked-out windows, driving a $90,000 rig through this sector this early. Guarantee you he's holding or running. Plates are out of state." "Mitch," Quinn noted, squinting at the mobile data terminal mounted between them. "Looks like a fleet vehicle. Let me run the tags before we light him up." "I don't need the computer to tell me a stolen vehicle when I see one," Sloan snapped, flipping the switch for the light bar and the siren. "I know this neighborhood. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." Inside the Tahoe, Vice Admiral Langston sighed softly. He was going to be slightly delayed, but he was a man of the law and respected the chain of command, civilian or military. He calmly activated his right turn signal, pulled the heavy SUV smoothly onto the shoulder of the road, shifted into park, and rolled down his window. He placed both of his large, steady hands on the top of the steering wheel, a textbook maneuver to put approaching law enforcement at ease. Sloan approached the driver's side, his hand resting aggressively on the butt of his service weapon. Quinn approached the passenger side, his flashlight cutting through the misty pre-dawn darkness. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now!" Sloan barked, shining his heavy maglite directly into Langston's eyes. Langston blinked against the blinding beam, but did not flinch. "Good morning, officer. My license and military identification are in my breast pocket. The vehicle registration is in the glove compartment. I need to reach for them. Is that acceptable?" Sloan scoffed, finally lowering the beam just enough to illuminate Langston's uniform. The officer's eyes swept over the crisp white fabric, the gold shoulder boards displaying 3 silver stars, and the immaculate array of ribbons. Instead of recognizing the sheer weight of the uniform before him, Sloan's lip curled into a sneer of utter disbelief and immediate hostility. "What is this, some kind of joke?" Sloan demanded, leaning closer to the window. "You heading home from a late Halloween party, pal? I said license and registration. Don't play games with me." "Officer," Langston said, his voice dropping to that calm, resonant, and absolute tone that had silenced war rooms and commanded thousands of sailors. "I am Vice Admiral Victor Langston, United States Navy. I am currently on my way to Naval Station Norfolk for a classified briefing. I assure you, this uniform is not a costume." "Right, and I'm the King of England," Sloan mocked. He unclipped his radio. "Dispatch. I've got a suspect here impersonating a military officer. Possible stolen vehicle." He looked back at Langston, his eyes burning with unwarranted authority. "Step out of the vehicle slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." On the passenger side, Quinn shone his light into the pristine interior of the Tahoe. He saw the official Department of Defense placards on the dash and the neatly organized briefing folders on the passenger seat bearing the unmistakable seal of the United States Navy. Derek?" Quinn called out nervously. "Everything looks pretty official in here. Maybe we should just look at his ID." "Shut up, Quinn. I'm handling this," Sloan shouted. He yanked the driver's side door open. "Get out of the car now." Vice Admiral Langston, maintaining a stoicism forged in the fires of actual combat, stepped out of the vehicle. He stood at his full height of 6 feet 2 inches, towering over the slightly shorter, stockier police officer. The sheer dignity radiating from Langston was palpable, but to a man like Sloan, it was interpreted as a direct challenge to his dominance. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car," Sloan ordered, his voice echoing in the quiet street. "Officer Sloan," Langston said, reading the man's name tag, "you are making a profound mistake. You are detaining a flag officer without probable cause and interfering with federal military operations. I strongly advise you to contact your shift lieutenant or the Norfolk base commander before you proceed any further." "Are you resisting?" Sloan yelled, stepping into Langston's personal space, trying to provoke a reaction. "I am absolutely complying." Langston did not raise his voice. "I am simply informing you of the reality of your situation." He turned and placed his hands flat on the cold, damp roof of the Tahoe. Without warning, Sloan grabbed Langston's left wrist, twisting it roughly behind his back. The violent motion pulled at the meticulously tailored fabric of the service dress whites. Sloan kicked Langston's feet apart, far harder than necessary, and slammed the older man's chest against the side of the vehicle. Click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs locked tightly around the wrists of a man who held the highest security clearances in the nation. Sloan wrenched the cuffs up, forcing a sharp breath from Langston, though the Admiral refused to give the officer the satisfaction of a cry of pain. "Stolen valor is a crime, buddy," Sloan whispered venomously into Langston's ear. "And resisting a lawful order gets you a ride downtown. Let's see how tough you are when we book you in." Vice Admiral Victor Langston was practically shoved into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the police cruiser. The angle of the handcuffs bit painfully into his wrists, but he sat as straight as the limited space would allow. His face was an unreadable mask of absolute discipline. He had faced down hostile foreign navies and navigated the most treacherous geopolitical crises of the modern era. He was not going to lose his composure over an arrogant, poorly trained patrolman. Outside the cruiser, Officer Sloan was standing by the trunk, leaning against the vehicle with a smug, self-satisfied grin. He was holding Langston's leather wallet, flipping through it like a child examining a captured prize. Quinn paced nervously around the front of the cruiser. He finally walked back to his partner, his face pale in the flashing emergency lights. "Derek, I ran the plates while you were cuffing him. The Tahoe isn't stolen. It's registered directly to the United States Department of Defense. It's a secure fleet vehicle." Sloan waved his hand dismissively, though a tiny flicker of doubt crossed his eyes before his ego squashed it. "So he stole a government car instead of a civilian one. Makes it a federal crime. We just bagged a massive felony, Travis. We're going to get commendations for this." "Derek, look at the ID," Quinn pleaded, pointing at the wallet in Sloan's hand. "Look at it closely." Sloan pulled out Langston's common access card. He stared at the holographic overlays, the embedded microchip, and the crisp, high-resolution photograph of Victor Langston staring back at him. Beside it was Langston's Virginia driver's license, perfectly matching the name, date of birth, and address. There were no signs of tampering. It was flawlessly authentic. "Anybody can buy a fake ID on the internet these days." Sloan doubled down, though his voice lacked a fraction of its previous bluster. A black guy in his late 50s driving a DoD vehicle wearing 3 stars. Give me a break. Do you know how rare a 3-star admiral is? You think one of them is just driving himself around Norfolk this early without an escort? From the back seat, Langston's voice cut through the reinforced partition glass. The window was cracked just enough for him to be heard clearly. "I prefer to drive myself when I have time to gather my thoughts before a briefing. Officer Sloan," Langston stated smoothly, "now that you have seen my credentials and verified the vehicle's registration, I will state this one final time. Remove these handcuffs, return my property, and let me proceed to my post. If you do not, the consequences will not be handled by your internal affairs department." They will be handled by the Department of the Navy. Sloane's face flushed red with anger. He walked over to the cracked window, leaning down to sneer at the restrained Admiral. You think you can threaten me from the back of my own squad car? You're a fraud. You probably bought those ribbons at an Army surplus store. In my right breast pocket is a secured, encrypted mobile phone, Langston replied, completely ignoring Sloane's insults. Take it out. Press the single button on the front screen. It will instantly dial my commanding officer, Admiral Harlan Crowe, the commander of Fleet Forces. Tell him you have detained his deputy commander. See what he says. Sloane laughed loudly, a harsh, grating sound. Oh, I'll call him. I'll call your little accomplice right now. And when this guy answers, I'm going to track his location and have him arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud. Derek, don't do this, Quinn whispered, a profound sense of impending doom settling in the pit of his stomach. If he is who he says he is, we are so incredibly fired. We're not getting fired, rookie. Watch and learn how real police work is done. Sloane opened the back door, reached into Langston's uniform pocket, ignoring the sharp, disgusted look the Admiral gave him, and pulled out the heavy, ruggedized smartphone. It didn't look like a normal commercial phone. There was no brand logo, only a matte black casing and a biometric scanner. Sloane stared at it, momentarily confused by the lack of a standard keypad. Press the screen, Langston instructed softly. Sloane tapped the screen. A single prompt appeared. Emergency comms, initiate. Sloane pressed it. The phone didn't ring with a standard dial tone. Instead, there was a series of encrypted electronic chirps, followed by a sudden dead silence. Sloane put it on speakerphone, holding it up so Quinn could hear. For a few agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then, a voice answered. It wasn't a sleepy accomplice. It was the sharp, hyper-alert voice of a military communications duty officer. Fleet Forces Command, Secure Line Alpha, state your authorization code. Sloane blinked, momentarily thrown off by the intense professionalism. Yeah, hi. This is Officer Derek Sloane, Norfolk Police Department, badge number 8442. I've got a guy detained here claiming to be an admiral, and he told me to call this number to talk to a Harlan Crowe. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The typing of keyboards in the background suddenly stopped. Officer, you are holding a Level 1 secure encrypted device registered to Vice Admiral Victor Langston. Are you stating you have Vice Admiral Langston in police custody? I have a guy in a costume in custody, yeah, Sloane said, trying to maintain his bravado. He's driving a DOD vehicle and impersonating— Hold the line, do not disconnect, do not move. The duty officer interrupted, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute chilling severity. Patching you directly to Admiral Crowe. Stand by. Quinn took a full step back from Sloane, his hands coming up to his head. Derek, oh my God. Derek, you arrested an admiral. Shut up, Sloane hissed, but the phone in his hand was suddenly trembling. A click echoed from the speakerphone. Then a new voice filled the misty morning air. It was a deep, gravelly voice that carried the weight of 4 stars and the authority of the United States government. It was Admiral Harlan Crowe. This is Admiral Crowe. To whom am I speaking? Sloane swallowed hard, his throat suddenly bone dry. Admiral, sir. This is Officer Derek Sloane with the Norfolk PD. I pulled over a vehicle. Officer Sloane, Crowe interrupted, his voice unnervingly calm, the kind of calm that precedes a devastating artillery strike. Is Vice Admiral Victor Langston currently in your custody? Sir, I pulled over a suspicious vehicle and the driver was wearing a uniform. And it is a simple yes or no question, officer. Are my deputy commander's wrists currently in handcuffs? Sloane looked through the window at Langston. Langston stared back, his eyes boring holes straight through the terrified police officer. Yes, sir, Sloane whispered. You have moments to secure that scene. Crowe's voice turned to ice, because Vice Admiral Langston's encrypted phone just broadcasted a distress ping to Naval Security Forces the second you initiated that call. My military police, heavily armed, are closing in on your exact GPS coordinates. And Officer Sloane, if there is a single scuff mark on that man's uniform when they arrive, your precinct captain will be the absolute least of your worries. Do not speak. Do not move. Wait for my men. The line went dead. The phone slipped from Sloane's sweating fingers, clattering onto the asphalt. In the distance, the wail of approaching sirens, not police sirens, but the heavy, distinct blare of military response vehicles, began to echo through the morning fog. The mist rolling off the Virginia coast seemed to part violently as the roar of heavy diesel engines drowned out the rhythmic hum of the local patrol car. Officer Derek Sloan stood frozen, the encrypted smartphone lying at his feet, its black screen a silent testament to the colossal error he had just made. Officer Travis Quinn was already backing away, his hands raised in the air, frantically signaling his surrender to an enemy that hadn't even arrived yet. Suddenly, the street was flooded with blinding, piercing white spotlights. Two massive, heavily armored Lenco Bearcats, painted in matte tactical black, with U.S. Navy security forces stenciled on the sides, aggressively swerved around the Norfolk police cruiser. They boxed it in perfectly, cutting off any avenue of escape. Behind them, 3 unmarked tactical SUVs screeched to a halt, blocking the intersection. Before the vehicles had even completely stopped, the doors flew open. Over a dozen heavily armed military police officers poured out. They moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency that made Sloan's local precinct training look like a middle school fire drill. They carried compact M4 carbines, their tactical gear strapped tight, their faces set in stone. "Norfolk PD, step away from the vehicle. Keep your hands visible," barked a voice over a bullhorn. Sloan's knees buckled slightly. He raised his trembling hands, stepping back until his spine hit the side of his own cruiser. I'm a police officer." "We're on the same side," he stammered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its former arrogance. A tall, broad-shouldered Naval Security Forces officer, Captain Brennan Shaw, strode purposefully through the perimeter. He didn't even look at Sloan. He walked straight to the rear door of the patrol car and yanked it open. "Admiral Langston, sir, are you injured?" Captain Shaw asked, his voice tight with barely suppressed outrage at the sight of his commanding officer restrained in the back of a civilian police car. Vice Admiral Langston shifted his broad shoulders, his face an impenetrable mask of composure. "I am unharmed, Captain, though my schedule has been significantly compromised." "Get these off him immediately," Shaw snapped over his shoulder. A military police sergeant stepped forward with a specialized pair of bolt cutters, refusing to even ask Sloan for the keys. With 2 swift, metallic crunches, the steel handcuffs were severed and tossed onto the wet asphalt. Langston stepped out of the cramped back seat. He calmly straightened his service dress whites, brushing a speck of dust off his ribbons. He rubbed his wrists, where deep red indentations marked his skin, but his eyes never left Sloan. Sloan was hyperventilating, surrounded by military personnel who viewed him not as a fellow law enforcement officer, but as an immediate threat to a high-ranking asset. "Derek," Quinn whispered, practically in tears, I told you to look at the ID." The flashing lights of another vehicle pierced the fog, this one bearing the familiar blue and white of the Norfolk Police Department. It wasn't a patrol car, it was a command SUV. The heavy door slammed shut, and Chief Donovan Briggs marched toward the chaotic scene. His face was a shade of deep purple, a mixture of sleep deprivation and absolute unadulterated fury. Admiral Crowe hadn't just dispatched the military police. He had personally called the civilian chief of police at his home, dragging him out of bed with a promise that if he wasn't on the scene quickly, the Department of Defense would sever all jurisdictional cooperation with the city of Norfolk. Chief Briggs stormed past the armed MPs, who parted just enough to let him through. He walked straight up to Sloan and stopped inches from his face. "Chief, Sloan started, desperately trying to salvage his shattered reality. He was driving a blacked-out vehicle, out of state plates, and he was evasive. "Shut your mouth, Sloan," Briggs hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "Do not utter a single syllable." Briggs turned on his heel and faced Vice Admiral Langston, the chief of police, a man who answered to the mayor and commanded thousands, snapped a crisp, rigid salute to the Navy Admiral. "Admiral Langston, I cannot begin to express my profound apologies," Chief Briggs said, his voice carrying clearly over the idling engines of the armored vehicles. "This is an unconscionable breach of protocol, training, and basic human decency. I take full responsibility for my officers' actions." Langston returned the salute slowly, his eyes calculating. "Chief Briggs, your officer did not just breach protocol. He bypassed verified federal identification, physically assaulted a flag officer, and actively delayed a classified national security briefing. He stated out loud that my uniform was a costume and my identification was forged, despite his own partner confirming the Department of Defense registration. Chief Briggs slowly turned his head to look at Sloan. The glare was murderous. "Is this true, Officer Quinn?" Briggs asked, his eyes locking onto the trembling rookie. "Yes, Chief," Quinn said, his voice shaking. "I ran the plates. I told him it was a DOD vehicle. I told him the ID was real. He refused to listen. I was doing police work," Sloan protested, a final pathetic surge of ego bubbling up. He didn't look like an admiral. The silence that followed was deafening. The underlying, unspoken prejudice in Sloan's words hung in the misty air, heavy and toxic. Langston took one slow step forward. The sheer gravitational pull of his presence forced Sloan to shrink back against his cruiser. "I have spent 35 years defending the Constitution that gives you the right to wear that badge, Officer Sloan," Langston said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "I have led men and women of every race, creed, and background into combat. We shed blood together so that men like you can sleep safely in your beds. And yet, you looked at me, looked at my uniform, looked at my federal credentials, and decided that a black man driving a secure vehicle this early could only be a criminal." Sloan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was completely out of his depth, drowning in the consequences of his own hubris. "Chief Briggs," Langston continued, turning back to the police chief, "I have a briefing to attend, but when I am finished, my legal liaison from the Judge Advocate General's Corps will be contacting the Department of Justice. Have a good morning." With that, Vice Admiral Langston turned, surrounded by a phalanx of heavily armed naval security forces, and climbed into the back of one of the tactical SUVs. The convoy sped off, leaving the local police officers standing in the wake of the storm. The aftermath of the incident was neither swift nor quiet. It was a systematic, brutal dismantling of Derek Sloan's life and career. He had assumed his police union would protect him as they had done with his previous use of force complaints. He was catastrophically wrong. The moment the Department of Defense filed a formal complaint, the local political machinery abandoned Sloan entirely. By the end of that morning, before the end of his shift, Sloan was stripped of his badge, his service weapon, and his police powers. Chief Briggs formally terminated his employment with cause, citing gross misconduct, insubordination, and unlawful detainment. The federal investigation, the real twist of karma, came soon after. The FBI Civil Rights Division, alerted by the Pentagon, opened a federal probe because Sloan had explicitly ignored valid DOD registration and federal identification to detain Langston based on racial profiling. He was charged under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. The financial ruin followed. The police union, recognizing the political suicide of defending a rogue cop who assaulted a 3-star Navy admiral, refused to cover his legal fees. Sloan was forced to drain his savings to hire a private defense attorney. His pension, which he was only 2 years away from fully vesting in, was frozen and ultimately revoked upon his federal indictment. Officer Travis Quinn faced a grueling internal affairs investigation. However, because his body camera footage corroborated that he had actively tried to stop Sloan, verified the DOD plates, and advocated for the Admiral's release, he was spared termination. He received a 2-week unpaid suspension for failing to physically intervene against his senior partner, a harsh but necessary lesson in the moral obligations of the badge. He returned to the force fundamentally changed, vowing never to let the toxic culture of the Blue Wall override the law. Later, Derek Sloan stood in a federal courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia. He was no longer wearing a uniform. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He looked older, broken, and entirely defeated. Vice Admiral Victor Langston did not attend the sentencing. He was halfway across the world, commanding a fleet in the Mediterranean, focused on matters of actual global security. He had given his testimony via a sworn deposition and left the justice system to do its work. The federal judge looked down at Sloan with absolute disdain. "Mr. Sloan, you were granted authority to protect and serve the public," the judge stated, the gavel resting heavily in his hand. "Instead, fueled by arrogance and insidious prejudice, you chose to humiliate and unlawfully assault a decorated military commander. You brought disgrace to your department and to the uniform you wore." Sloan was sentenced to 36 months in federal prison for the civil rights violation, followed by 3 years of supervised release. As the bailiff placed handcuffs on Sloan's wrists, the cold steel biting into his skin, exactly as it had done to Admiral Langston, he finally understood the full weight of his actions. The smirking patrol officer who thought he owned the streets was gone, replaced by a convicted felon who had to learn the hardest lesson of all. Authority is a privilege, and when abused, it shatters the abuser. True power doesn't need to shout, and unchecked arrogance always meets its match. Vice Admiral Langston's calm discipline in the face of blatant prejudice proved that true leadership outshines petty ego, delivering a deeply satisfying dose of real-world karma to a rogue officer. If you were captivated by this incredible story of justice, respect, and instant regret, please drop a like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping, true-to-life stories. Hi, my name is Boar Justice, the owner and manager of Boar Justice. After watching the video, cop handcuffs a black Navy admiral in uniform. His commanding officer makes him instantly regret it. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? For me, the strongest feeling was respect for the calm professionalism the admiral showed under pressure. What stayed with me wasn't just the dramatic turning point, but the reminder that real leadership is often measured by composure, integrity, and how we treat others, especially before we know who they are. Respect should never depend on rank, appearance, or first impressions. I'm curious which moment had the biggest impact on you. Was it the traffic stop, the moment the admiral's identity was confirmed, or the arrival of his commanding officer? And if you had been one of the officers on the scene, what do you think should have happened differently from the very beginning? One lesson I took from this story is that taking a moment to listen and avoid making assumptions can prevent mistakes that are difficult to undo. In everyday life, showing patience and treating people with dignity goes a long way. If this story gave you something to think about, I'd really enjoy reading your perspective in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about accountability, respect, and justice, feel free to like the video or subscribe if you think it's worth your time.